Hey there, this is Dan, and you're watching The Salty Sea. I'm here today with a a kind of odd uh, video name, right? How do you put tiers into any kind of narrative piece of the game? I just wanted to talk about how you'll hear a lot of people tell you Warcry essentially is meant to be a narrative game, and I think that's mostly true. But um, one of the cool things about it is it comes with a whole bunch of bits of narrative on its own, right? If you take a look at the Grand Alliance books, you'll see sort of introductory blurbs for every single faction that's in the game, telling you, what they're about, why they're up here in the 8 points, all of that. And there's a lot of really interesting stuff there to share with you, but I also want to be a little critical of it too, because, we're here to rank things. Everything is about ranking, isn't it? Um, so I read all of the intro blurbs in the Grand Alliance books, and I found them really interesting. I can't wait to share it. So some of the main goals of the blurbs, they start off kind of talking about the central army concept. I'm going to look into, did they make it compelling? Was it fun to read, written well? What is the army up to in the 8 points? Did they do a good job sort of centering them in the setting? I'm going to do that for all of Death and Order in this part. Um, and I also want to just look at, like, so these Grand Alliance books, you're probably getting them after Warcry is supposedly, the skirmish game, the more introductory uh, level game to the Age of Sigmar setting. And so you've got your first warband. Now you're buying the Grand Alliance book, and you have all of the other factions that are in the same GA as your first warband, and so uh, they would be pretty influential, I think, to a new player who's trying to decide on the second thing they're going to get. Um, at some point in this, I'm going to say something mean about the narrative of your favorite faction, probably. Relax. It's okay. Everyone likes different things, and I'll be talking about that as I get into it too. So we're going to start with Flesh Eater Courts. They're the very first one in the Death Book, and I think they're done really well. I think FEC lore is just really good in general. That the whole delusion that they're under, the kind of are they Bretonia or not thing is really fun. The I actually just really like sort of the concept of them as these sort of giant sort of ghoul monsters. Um, they added some extra stuff though in this blurb that I thought was really effective. I'm going to read you a quote from every single one of these to kind of let you sink in a little bit to the flavor of each of these factions. Splinterbone has forged a tense truce with the Chaos Warbands surrounding his macabre refuge, mercilessly slaughtering intruders, but by and large content to keep to himself and indulge in his gory banquets. I love it. This Lord Splinty B, as I call him, he just wants to devour innocence in peace, okay? Um, I love the sort of horror Switzerland situation that they've built for the Flesh Eater Courts. Um, I think it would be a super fun thing to build a warband around. Um, yeah, and they didn't have to do this. They didn't have to put all this effort in uh, to sort of create an entire new Flesh Eater Court kingdom for the 8 points, but they did anyway, and I really love that. So absolutely giving them an A here on the tier list. Going to Legions of Nagash though, maybe not so generous. So Legions of Nagash without Nagash, because he's too big to be in Warcry, uh, is pretty boring. They're just middle managers, really. There's not really much to them, and the blurb is written pretty dryly. Um, they don't have personality, which Soulblight Gravelords, in my opinion, totally fixed it. But of course, these GA books are a little older. There is no SBG blurb. I would love to see what they would do with something like that. Um, the Age of Sigmar 3 core book has an SBG blurb, so I think that that's a really good sort of guessing point for what they would do here. Um, One thing though that I did like, they give you a really solid conversion idea here with Legions of Nagash. The roiling storm of death magic unleashed at the dawn of the Arcanum Optimar saw many fallen champions stir from their barrows and monolith tombs. They seek to pit their blades against their rival warriors, as they did in life. Uh, you can make these skeleton hordes just kind of skeleton hordes if you want, or this is sort of encouraging you. It just kind of gives you this story full in here. This is basically what keeps it from being an F, in my opinion. Is they give you this conversion idea. You could like put bits and bobs on to show their previous lives in the 8 points that I think could be really effective in the right person's hands. Moving into Nighthaunt, uh, the intro materials for Nighthaunt are just horrifying. Um, Nagash's personality comes to life here a lot more than with Legions of Nagash, oddly enough, because Nighthaunt are just sort of his torture things, his kind of punishment playthings that he tortures for all existence. Um, that does give me a bit of a nitpick where Nighthaunt don't really have much of their own. It's just all Nagash. Um, but seeing each of them and like what he's done to them, uh, I hate it to be honest because I'm not that into horror, but it's pretty vividly written and really intense. Here's just one of the better examples is Dreadscythe Harridans. These damned souls were once healers, cursed and remade by Nagash to tear apart the living with bladed limbs. Unlike most Nighthaunts, their minds remain powerless but intact, forcing them to witness the cruelties they inflict. Oof. Um, the whole thing is written like this, and I think it's pretty effective, even though it's not my style. Um, Giving it a B just because the nitpick I think is real. If I were so Nighthaunt have an amazing model range, some of the best stuff GW has ever produced, but if I were to get all that and then find out that they don't have their own minds and they're just sort of pawns of a guy who isn't even necessarily really part of the army or doesn't even fit the aesthetic, I'd be a little disappointed personally. Um, so I think that would maybe dissuade me from jumping into this force if I was just going by the blurb and didn't really know much about the models yet. So that would be the only sort of issue I have with it. But otherwise, it's just as a piece of writing, it's really amazing. Then we get to the Ossiarch Bonereapers, a morbid legion of conquerors as darkly majestic as they are ruthless. I love the flavor for the Bonereapers, sort of the endless ranks of elite, invincible in their minds at least, warriors. It really just paints a picture. They're able to kind of keep their own personality, which I think is really key for making them compelling, but they stay just methodical, efficient, mercilessly inevitable. You know, the sort of taking every problem piece by piece, right? So their reason for being in the 8 points could have been really terrible, right? Just like, hey man, we're just here scouting. That could come off really stupid, and instead GW made it absolutely epic. It fits the rest of their lore really well. Just they invaded once, it didn't quite work, and now they're just like one piece, one step at a time, making sure that the next invasion is going to work better. Um, I love that. I think it fits perfectly with what they're up to. The only thing that makes it hard for me to put them in A, I might end up putting them there anyway, is they spend some time on the bone tithe in this blurb, and the bone tithe only makes sense if you don't think about it. It's the least efficient way to collect bones. It's for an army for a force that's all about sort of being the absolutely most effective way to do every single thing that they put their minds to, uh, then having this kind of ridiculous bone tithe, it just makes no sense. Um, yeah, I don't know, and that's fine. That's how GW does it, right? Sort of dramatic over making sense is always good. Uh, Space Marines in their bright colors, always an example of that. But um, yeah, that's just my only nitpick with Bonereapers. So here's where we are so far. I might move Ossiarch up a little bit into A, not sure. Um, Almost all of these are pretty solid though. So B is really for bountiful over balanced, right? I like all of the B ones that I come across, and you'll see later in this series as I talk about them. The only one of the death ones that I think isn't very good is Legions of Nagash, and I think legitimately they fix most of that with SBG. All right, so here we're going to get into order, and I'm not going to lie to you, this is my third time recording this section, but I'm excited. I've got some new technology here to share with you, new faces on the screen. Um, So we're going to start with Cities of Sigmar. That's the first one in order. And cities, I go back and forth on. So what's cool about cities, right? They're just dudes, regular old dudes, you and me. Dudettes are even there. So yeah, it's just the forces of humanity, elvendom, dwarvendom. They're just some plucky underdogs doing their best over here. Uh, for some reason, most of them are German. Uh, Listen, shout out to Legends of the Painty Men. They do a way better job than I ever could. Uh, sort of poking fun at this little fact that, somehow the mortal realms were created out of, the old world that was this sort of pseudo Earth. Um, and Sigmar, he really missed his German buddies, so he made all of the humans wear German clothes. It's fine. It works great. Uh, Listen, so Cities of Sigmar, they are lovable, but they are a bit bland. So the little blurbs for what each city does, most of the cities I honestly think are pretty compelling, in their own lore. But in the blurb here, you really only get like a sentence. So if this was your first time reading it, you would you wouldn't know what to think really of what is actually there in COS. Um, Generally, what I see when I see other people's sort of cool Cities of Sigmar concepts is I see them having done a ton of the work and GW having done almost none of it. Um, so, for Cities of Sigmar warbands narratively, I think it is what you make of it. However, there is there is this cool demise, or sorry, this cool quote here. Most meet with a swift demise, but some survive and grow strong, their members' various skills combining to become far greater than the sum of their parts. I love, even in their own lore, Cities of Sigmar are the underdogs, but they're the ones who sometimes win, right? It's if you've ever watched the movie Miracle, it's about the US versus the Russian ice hockey team, and the coach just goes, you know, if we play them 10 times, they'll beat us nine, but not tonight. I feel like that's what Cities of Sigmar are saying anytime they go up against these, absurd horror war bands from other factions. Listen, I just sort of gushed about Cities of Sigmar a whole bunch there, but none of that is in this blurb. If you read this blurb, you would not play Cities of Sigmar ever again. So yeah, C. Daughters of Khaine, though. Morathi is the best character GW have ever done in any system. Changed my mind. Um, Actually, Dana Howell does probably the very best sort of explanation of why Morathi is so interesting. She has a video out there somewhere. You can search for it where she's painting a Morathi while talking about what makes her so compelling. I have my own takes on what makes Morathi amazing. Rank and file daughters aren't quite as multi-layered as they made their leader, but that's okay. They're pretty one note, but I think it's a really well executed note. Um, I am curious to know if the books sort of mix it up much, if it's sort of all uh, killer aerobics instructors from the 80s, or if it changes up at all. Um, I also love the way they paint the daughters here. This quote kind of says it all. Some have made their way to the Reaver city of Karngrad, where their breathtaking skill in the blood pits has earned them a stay of execution. I've always thought Daughters of Khaine was kind of secretly a chaos army, that they would hang out better with them than they do with Order. Of course, Marathi hates the Chaos Gods. She hates Slanesh more than anything in the world, which really just makes her a Khorne god, right? Her hatred of Slanesh, her love of blood. Um, I'm I'm happy to see them sort of explore it a little bit. I know it's this kind of unspoken thing that they can't really speak to too much, or else it kind of ruins the illusion of what Doc is doing. But I don't know. I'm glad that they at least gave it a little bit of lip service here. It's also one of the only it's not the only one, but it's one of the only factions where their reason for being in Warcry and the 8 points, which it's either that they wandered in there and actually turned out to love it, which is the quote I did, or it's that they're out there looking for Varanite. it actually ended up mattering to the larger AOS story, which I love. Gotta give them points for that. If you're actually if your presence in Warcry is actually driving forward the entire narrative of the setting, you get an A in my book. On to Fyreslayers. Fyreslayers, so I'm going to try my best, right? So Fyreslayers they're one of the least popular factions. I actually think Magmadroths and the guys riding Magmadroths look incredible. Um, but they're one of the least popular factions. Um, Part of it, the lore, they're just belligerent dwarves with daddy issues. They just kind of shout and grumble at people, and they care about their long lost forefather a whole lot. Um, the blurb is kind of boring. It's just like, they really like gold, and um, they yeah, they just don't have a ton of personality in at least this blurb. Um, I would be interested to see Games Workshop take another pass at them. Hopefully, there's a ton of rumors that sort of a mixed Duardin book that could be really interesting because I think that the 2D art that they've done for Fyreslayers is some of the best stuff they've ever commissioned. It all comes from the same artist. Um, Hopefully, I will remember to put a little pop up here saying his name because I think he's incredibly talented. Um, the way it all comes together in their battle tome, in all of the sort of materials about them to kind of create the same vibe in slightly different styles, right? He kind of has this thing where he can give you different techniques that kind of create different visuals, but they all kind of come together into the same cohesive vision. Um, I don't know if they've done that for other factions. Commissioned it all from the same artist, but they definitely should try it again. I think it's an incredible effect. Unfortunately, it just doesn't really speak to their personality at all. It doesn't really come across on the tabletop where they all look the same. Sorry, Fyreslayers lovers, I love you even if I don't love your Fyreslayers. Um, their reason for being in the 8 points is really tragic. Either they're just looking for gold, which whatever, they're dwarves, of course they're looking for gold, or they're being belligerent dicks. So you know, pick your poison there, I guess. Uh, the quote even speaks to the same thing. The so-called ever-chosen, I can't pull off a Scottish accent, but almost everything they write in Fyreslayers feels like it should be done in a Scottish accent. Um, the so-called ever-chosen is fortunate that so many other matters hold my attention. Else I might decide to kick down the doors of his shoddy tower myself. Uh, some Fyreslayer, I'm sure every Fyreslayer thinks this. Miss me with it, I'm not interested. Um, D for Fyreslayers. Deepkin, though, um, incredible. So all of these blurbs, they have their formula, right? The Deepkin one completely just skips it, and it just goes straight to the Idoneth story. And maybe it's because they had to tell it in such a short place, but it is an incredible roller coaster here. This is the only blurb in the entire, you know, I read all 4 books for this. It's the only time I actually forgot that I was reading it to review it. Um, and normally, the Idoneth origin story can be a bit melodramatic. I do think it's compelling, but it can be a bit melodramatic, right? Um, the destruction of his own race by Teclis and the hiding in the deep blue seas, you know, resurrecting this dead god Mathlan, and not resurrecting him, but like evoking shades of him. And, I've read fiction for them where it's like, some ancient whale goes and bites one of their turtles in half. And it's like, well, if their turtles just get bitten in half, why are they supposed to be these incredible defensive thing. Anyway, so I don't always love their lore, but here it's incredible. It tells the story from Teclis's sort of birth of them and betrayal of them down to their sort of fearful plight, down to their curse, into their into the way they've kind of dealt with fixing the curse, and the different factions, some of whom are ashamed of it, some of whom like lean into it and it's basically has turned them evil. Some of whom, they're trying to only take out chaos people to harvest these souls. It's really fascinating the way they've written it here. I love it. I wish they could have gotten all the blurbs so narrative, so kind of juicy with meaning. Um, Now, after just gushing about their story, I have to take them down a peg. The word Idoneth means both extreme seclusion and desperate measures in the intricate language of the elves. What? What? Come on, GW. So this is the kind of writing, right, that it either works for you or it doesn't, and sometimes it does both. Uh, GW has to turn it up to 11 every time, right? And when you turn everything up to 11, sometimes, you're swinging for the fence every time. Sometimes you're gonna strike out, and sometimes you're gonna hit a home run, and sometimes you're gonna do both within the same paragraph. And this was their strikeout that led to all their home runs. S tier, by the way. Kharadron Overlords. Um, They have an incredible model range. Iconic, beloved. The concept absolutely slaps. But here it comes off as a mess. Every sentence is a contradiction of the previous one, right? They go like, we have sky refugees that barely escaped, um, but they're super capitalists and they have all these already established businesses. They care about nothing but profit, but they have a code, a strict code. Uh, but everyone ignores it. They love gold because they're dwarves. Get it? Dwarves love gold. We're really subtle. Uh, but actually, the gold is special gold that does stuff. It's not just gold. And the special gold, it's called Grungni's breath, who is their dead god. But actually, they're super atheists. They hate gods. Forget that we called the special gold Grungni's breath. They love their boats. They take their boats everywhere. They define their whole lives by their airships. Oh yeah, but right, this is Warcry. We don't put the boats in Warcry, so sometimes they don't use the boats. It's just a mess. It's awful. KO deserve better than this. I actually think KO lore is really, really interesting. Just don't read it here. Um, the one thing that is really clear to me, though, at least, I don't love it, but at least it's really clear is their reason for being in the 8 points. Uh, Unlike most forces of order, most Kharadron do not view the 8 points with a sense of spiritual horror. To these pragmatic Duarden, Archaon's domain is merely another vector of wealth. I just think that that really clearly sums kind of, what they're up to in the setting. And even though I don't love it as a reason for being, I do love how clear and concise it is. So let's get into Lumineth Realmlords. My hot take is High Elves are the most boring elf. Almost every time you see it done, whether it's in the Warhammer universe or fantasy, it's this sort of, we're this perfect shining city on the hill, cue dramatic music, or are we? Um, and then eh, it's just, it's predictable. It's kind of boring to me, but this blurb actually puts in real effort into making the or are we part actually interesting. It talks about them kind of connecting and communing with the land to sort of, it makes the fall of the Lumineth sound really interesting, and then their sort of land communion as a result, or sorry, as a reaction to sort of fixing the parts of themselves and the self-improvement that is needed to sort of never fall again. It's this kind of thing where elves are sort of famously arrogant, but there is this piece of humility in the Realm Lords where they understand um, that what happened to them is their fault and that they need to find a way to fix it. Um, Also, this blurb kind of fails to mention the part about using Aether Quartz to remove their emotions, which is a good thing. Well, when I first was reading about Realm Lords when they came out, was it like a year and a half ago? Um, I read that part and I was just like, oh, thanks for putting this in here because it means I don't have to care about them. It means I can just kind of um, dismiss them right now. Uh, because as soon as you tell me, oh, they have zero emotions whatsoever, I go, oh, okay, they're robots. I am not a robot. I'm a person. I, think and feel and care about things. So I'll just go and follow the people who do think and feel and care about things. And that's not these guys. So the fact that they actually just completely fail to mention that part, I kind of hope it's a trend. I kind of hope that it's like in the next battle tome, the mentions of Aether Quartz are few and far between, and when they do, it's like it only maybe dampens their emotions instead of just removing it outright. I just think that that would make them so much more compelling. I think that Lumineth are at their most interesting when like I said before, they're sort of communing with the land and sort of searching to find the or searching to rectify the sort of spiritual flaws, looking for spiritual redemption, um, to be better than they were before. I like how sort of ridiculously arrogant they are, and yet their own actions sort of show a certain sort of humility. And I also really liked that they kind of made a really interesting. They gave two reasons, one of which was horrible, but one was really interesting as far as being in the 8 points. I'll just read it out. Guarded by bands of disciplined warriors, elven mages seek to check the chaotic energies ravaging the Bloodwind spoil, if only for a time. By encircling wellsprings of ruinous energy with, and then they explain it, it goes on for ages, stuff. Uh, the Lumineth quieten the spoil's rage just enough to aid them and their civilized allies in the ongoing war. Really, it tells you so much about them right away. It tells you, one, that they're like really dedicated team players to the overall, to Sigmar's cause, which can either make you barf or make you find them more compelling, depending on, what style you are. But I think it's really interesting that they just like, went for a clear role there. And then it also um, gets more into their kind of communing with the land thing, which I think is really interesting. I'm still only giving them a B because there is just a lot of kind of regular high elf business in here. And then there's also just, it goes on and on about their love of MacGuffins. Um, if you haven't heard of MacGuffins, it's kind of a technical literary criticism blah thing, but it's basically any kind of um, sort of useless item that is all important. So, any 90s movie where it's like two spies fighting over a microchip and it the MacGuffin just matters so that you know that whoever's holding the briefcase with the microchip in it, that person's winning. And whoever is getting close to it, they're catching up in the whoever's winning. um, Marvel did this with all the Infinity Stones. In some movies it was interesting, in some movies it didn't really work. It doesn't have to always be bad. For example, like in Lord of the Rings, the ring is a MacGuffin. um, and I find it really compelling because it's like the possession of it changes you. The books are talking a lot about sort of greed, which is kind of our fascination with materialism and MacGuffins anyway, right? That's kind of what makes sort of setting your story, having all your plot driven by just a piece of treasure. That's part of what makes it compelling. So MacGuffins can be done well. It's just that ever since Tolkien kind of created the genre going around this one sort of the microchip. Uh, a lot of people have done it poorly, and I think, you know, I love Warhammer storytelling, but they do it poorly more often than they do it well. Okay, so next on the list is Seraphon. Uh, Seraphon are space dinosaurs, right? They're cool. It's like, how do you get more just like little kid back of your brain cool than space dinosaurs, right? Uh, So this blurb is really dry. They do the unit info dump twice. Not not once like every other one, twice. Um, so it was rough. It was hard to get through this one. Um, we get nearly to page 2 before our real like classic GW over description of something, where they talk about the Starborn. Their blood glimmers with the energies of the heavens, and when they walk the realms outside of Aesir, they're often mistaken for phantoms or walking dreams given form. That's beautiful. I don't really love the transition to star stuff dinos that they started with. I think it's really good that they retconned to give the Seraphon something other than that. But if you're going to do it, I think describing it that way is really effective. Um, that was sort of one of the redeeming pieces. I also think that they had a pretty good justification for being in the 8 points of, you know, foiling the future plans of chaos, right? Similarly, those who were to be sacrificed on the altars of the ruinous powers have been freed at the last moment by mysterious, cold-blooded saviors, only to go on to perform great deeds and further thwart the infernal plots of the dark gods. Um, when you're talking about the Slann as these sort of super geniuses that do magic, um, having them foil chaotic plans like this, I think, is effective. Overall, I don't love the way they transitioned Seraphon from Warhammer Fantasy into AOS, and I think most of this blurb is pretty emblematic of that. But there are some flashes of something promising here. With especially with this justification for being in the 8 points, I think it takes the sort of magical mystery of the Seraphon and puts it into an interesting place. So overall, I think a really poor intro material, but I do think that, you know, a new player who's like, oh man, dinosaurs, let me read about what the dinosaurs are doing in this setting. They could still read this and convince themselves that yes, they do like space dinosaurs and want to play with them. Um, and I think, that's good enough for a C here. Let's get into the Stormcast Eternals, the poster boys of the entire setting. Um, GW pushed them really hard right from the beginning, and a lot of more established players essentially revolted. Um, Stormcast are still the most popular faction in the game, right? So they are effective. There are people out there who love Stormcast. I talked more in my Stormcast review about, why the sort of central power fantasy of having superhero humans in a setting is valuable to have, even though it's easy to make fun of. And so I do think it was legitimate for them to put them in here, but they just really didn't figure out what made them interesting until the AOS 3 video that just came out earlier this summer. I think they really nailed the tone in that video of sort of why the Stormcast fight, what is difficult about their struggle, all of that. And then since the video, they're getting sweet dragons, they feel more human. I love how they're just like honor bound to this Sisyphean task. um, I actually like personally, unironically think that uh, they're really compelling now after what they've gone through with certain sort of Broken Realm stuff, and then into this AOS 3 video that's kind of showing the Lord Veritant, I think, and sort of what he's up to. However, this blurb was made before that video, and it really shows. It does the thing that I don't like about, most high elf things and most fantasy things that's done much better in the LRL blurb of just saying like these are perfect Valhalla lightning men. Bum bum bum. Or are they? That's kind of GW's go-to when they don't have a great handle on what actually makes a faction compelling. High Elves, Tau, Stormcast kind of all have this. But yeah, they've done so much better lately. Um, so it's hard to get too mad about it, but I do have to give them a C. Uh, One fun thing, though, a little piece of humanity that was sprinkled into the blurb, because I want to give at least something positive about everything. Uh, though few would admit it, the 8 points inspire a creeping dread in the hearts of many Stormcasts. It is neither pain nor death that they fear, but corruption and a premature end to their service. They're just great guys. They're just trying to do good. I don't know. See. All right. Sylvaneth. Uh, Even more than Cities of Sigmar, Sylvaneth are the only faction that's truly underpowered, even in their own lore. The blurb even goes to say they don't even go to the 8 points because it corrupts their spirit song, driving them mad. Sylvaneth are too weak to exist in Warcry. That's it. I mean, basically, we could just shut it down here, right? Uh, Before I complain too much, let me just say Sylvaneth are my favorite faction. I love the model aesthetics. Um, there are parts of their battle tome that I love. There are parts I really hate. Their lore is an absolute mess right now, just all over the mortal realms. Alariel's role in Broken Realms was kind of a mess. She's just kind of bumbling around basically like Catelyn Stark in Game of Thrones, right? Where like she has all these plans, but they're all terrible plans, and then also she doesn't execute them very well. So everything gets worse every time she does anything. Um, I don't know. She's a god. You would think that she would have some kind of powers or ability to do anything. Um, so, they also have this interesting juxtaposition where GW doesn't really know if they're supposed to be noble forest creatures or creepy Halloween trees. Um, I see a lot of people do really incredible paint jobs along the sort of horror forest, cabin in the woods type of vibe. Um, and I've got nothing against those people. I mean, GW gives you a lot of that to sort of focus in on, but I generally think Sylvaneth are at their weakest in horror mode. Now, I do think Drycha Hamadreth is an incredible character, but she's not even really so much horror as like she's basically environmentalist Magneto. And I think that's really compelling, but that's not horror trees, right? That's not really what the Dreadwood blurb is doing. You know, it's not going in the same direction as what Dreich is going in. I think that they're better when there's sort of these otherworldly, beautiful forest creatures. I would love to see them kind of do a better job evoking what it's like to go adventuring in the forest with Sylvaneth. And they just don't. They don't do it well at all. Um, More than one logging expedition, dispatched from a free city, has been found torn apart, their organs draped across the branches in gory offering by the forest dwellers. This is the only fight that the Sylvaneth have ever won. All right, so far, here's what I've got for my for my narrative tier list. I like all of the B tier blurbs. So the line here between A and B is really thin. So you could convince me to put Bone Reapers in A. You could convince me to put Daughters of Khaine in B. It's really close there. I do think Flesh Eater Courts are just excellent. Um, they're just not quite on the level of that Deepkin blurb for me. So there it is. I think all of the C tier ones, it's just like one or two things that are in the way of an otherwise really solid core. I kind of judge it, the difference between C and D as being, you know, if I were a new player and I bought these GA books, and then, like I said, like the situation that I think GW is envisioning is this person has bought their first warband. They don't even know if they love, the setting. Um, and they're then reading through all the other war bands that are allied to theirs, wondering like, would I like this? Would I like this? Like, what would my second force be? Because your first Warcry force isn't even really the start of an army necessarily. Um, so I think everything in C, if you're predisposed to liking those models and you read this blurb, I think you could still convince yourself to start that force. But I do think everything in D and F would probably talk you out of your interest in a force if you were at all narratively focused in your playing and you read that blurb. Um, the other question is, should I have docked Daughters of Khaine for the rank and file being a lot less interesting than their leader? I don't know, right? Like Legions of Nagash, I punished very harshly for that. I just thought it was really clear in the blurb that there was nothing going on with them. Daughters of Khaine, I just don't think it's as bad, even though I do agree that, the average blood sister is just not as interesting as Marathi is. Um, but either way, I think they're still really done really well, and I love how they're tied into the main story. All right, so I'm going to be doing chaos and destruction in the next video, and then talking more about sort of all of it in general and how it coalesces. So until then, thanks so much for watching. I'm, really excited to be doing something about the narrative in this game. I've touched on it just so very lightly throughout the channel. But I do think it's really relevant because, Warcry being sort of the way you would start playing with these models. I think I see so many people sort of take pictures of having purchased like 7 boxes for their child, and they're like, I'm gonna get my kid into this army. And it's like that kid's not gonna paint 7 boxes of things, right? You need to have something to stick them into the game before you ask them to just build an army on their own. So I do think that uh, fitting the narrative into the skirmish game is really important, for sort of building this hobby. Um, and so, yeah, I'm just excited to be talking more about how they do it. If you've made it this far, please hit me up with a like. Otherwise, you know, I'll be making more videos in the future. I still, my rate has certainly gone down with the summer. That's probably gonna still be true, up until September. But I'm still excited about this game. I'm still excited to do more. So until the next time, May all your rolls be crits.